Friends, let us start with today's lecture as we have discussed about the constituents of tragedy as Aristotle has pointed out in his Poetics. And then we have planned to shift to the various things that Aristotle discussed about tragedy in Poetics. Now, please don't consider that we have finished with tragedy after discussing the constituent parts of tragedy in detail. We jumped from characters in chapter number 15 to reasoning in chapter number 19. That means from 15 to 19. But there is a lot of material in between. So this material is not bound to the framework of six constituent parts of tragedy that Aristotle established it in chapter number 6. Its presentation is loosely ordered, or sometimes you can say disordered, and sometimes obscure to the point of unintelligibility most of the times we feel. But it should not be neglected. The material which is in between 16, 17, 18, in between, returns repeatedly to Aristotle's central preoccupation with plot. But by contrast with the broad issues of principle treated in chapter number 7 to 14, when we discuss that how he talks about different constituents parts of tragedy. Now the emphasis in these latter chapters tends to be more practical. These chapters are broadly speaking concerns with matter of technique, and sometimes that's why it gives us a feeling that it looked beyond the design of abstracted plot towards its concrete realization into a play. Because there are certain abstract ideas, and how those abstract ideas have to be converted into a play. That sort of technique Aristotle is interested in pointing out in those remaining chapters, in the chapters that he discussed. So the chapters 17 starts from the perspective of a poet when constructing plots and working them out complete with their linguistic expressions. And chapter number 18 includes comments on how to handle the chorus. These are the things that Aristotle, as I said, it is a part of technique. He's talking about all those parts. Now, it is not to surprise that Aristotle's underlying concerns are with the connectedness of events, how the events are to be connected with each other. That is his basic concern. And this connection of events which make a plot, which can make a plot more interesting, how you connect the events, because plot is nothing but a connection of events. And you will find out Aristotle is underlying his concern about this connected events of plot, and that is repeatedly you will find out becoming evident in all these chapters when he talked about the techniques that has to be used. For example, in chapter number 16, when he turns to recognition which he defined in chapter number 11, but he turned towards recognition in chapter number 16 also. And he classifies a variety of different techniques by which recognition can be engineered, because it is quite difficult to have recognition that you have to put it in that particular event, you have to construct it accordingly, because you know it very well, my friends, that recognition is one of the very interesting and important components of complex plot. Revelation and recognition, that is the only thing which makes complex plot different than simple plot. Otherwise, the rest of the things are the same in both the plots. Now, Aristotle's view is more effective, and it is more effective because these two things add certain effects in the plot, and you can say in simple plot, which convert it into complex plot. Now, this classification from simple plot to complex plot is not abstract. And it is not of purely abstract interest that he wants it to be converted into complex plot because complex plots are suitable for tragedy or suitable for getting its objective done of purgation and all those things. It is not purely in an abstract sense or an abstract interest. The question is of how to handle these plots in a best way. How to handle these plots. And when you try to handle one of the devices which are useful for enhancing the tragic effects, you have to handle those items, those things in plot which can enhance the tragic effect. And these things are nothing but practical one. Because if you want to create an interest, if you want to develop an interest, you need to understand that how you are going to use it, how you will handle it. Now, Aristotle's classification works up from recognition that is a vital essence and that has to be the integral part of the plot. So how will you find out this recognition? There need to be some sort of artistic kind of recognition, and Aristotle is prompting this kind of recognition that the poet has to establish. Artistic kind of recognition. Not anyone is going to write down and saying that, okay, this has been recognized so urgently, so immediately. No. Artistic kind of recognition is expected there. And that is what Aristotle is pointing out. That is what Aristotle is saying it. For example, in Odyssey, Odysseus is recognized because of a scar on his face. Now, Aristotle is not or is trying to imply that as an audience, when we look at Odysseus, the acquisition of his scar has no casual link with plot. How will you find a casual link with plot? A scar on his face. But by contrast, the best class arises by the phrase which we used continuously when we are talking about imitation, that is necessity or probability. And those two things, necessity and probability, can be taken up from plot itself. In commending recognition of this kind, Aristotle picks up the idea started up in chapter number 10, that when something happens both unexpectedly and nevertheless as a necessary or probable consequence of what has gone before, this combination increases the audience's astonishment. That is what Aristotle is saying. As we have discussed this thing already before, that if you want to use the idea of recognition, or if you are using recognition, if you are commending of recognition, a scar on the face of Odysseus, the idea of necessity and probability being a part of plot, and this necessity and probability, when we discussed earlier, we discussed about necessity and probability, that this necessity and probability has something to do with the unexpected and necessary and probable consequences. What is happening on the stage is nothing but a consequence of what the event that has already taken place before it. So when an action begins in a play, this action is not newly initiated action. This action has something to do with the thing that happened before of the stage. That is a consequence of that thing that is taking place here, and from here onwards we are going to observe what will happen, what how it will come to an end. That means again Aristotle is moving towards the idea of unities. Now what this used to do, why this is, and that's what we discussed already earlier, that this develops a sort of inquiry or inquisition in the minds of audiences, and it is audiences astonishment, and this astonishment leads to the tragic impact, emotional impact of the events on the minds of the audience, which will help us to reach to the objective of tragedy. This is important, my friends. Aristotle was preoccupied with the two things, necessity and probability. This necessity and probability are not connected to the product of abstract formalism. It is not abstract, it is not formulated in an abstract way. It has to be designed, it has to be constructed, and that's why when a poet writes a drama, he has to construct that thing. It is not already there in the story, he has to construct it. And he believes that there is an intimate connection between the cohesion of the plot and the emotional impact at which tragedy aims at. There is an intimate connection between all these things. Then and then it is possible for you to reach to that impact of tragedy. This is basically a technique that how a writer should, how a poet should, how a tragic poet should construct these things. He's talking about this particular technique. The latter part of chapter 17 explores some procedural implications of the theory of proper plot structure that he discussed in 7 to 14. Aristotle is trying to bring out certain procedural implication of this theory of how a plot should be properly structured. If you remember the discussion that we initiated in a couple of weeks back when we are talking about how the plots are and how are the different aspects of plot and how plot will be the most essential part and prime part of any tragic plot, any tragedy. As we know it very well, that tragedy aims at to create, to develop pity and fear. It is to excite pity and fear. So, to excite this pity and fear, a story is needed that will have a powerful emotional effect. And we know from the discussions in chapter number 13 and 14, in which Aristotle discusses that which kind of or which kinds of story are most appropriate for such kind of tragic effect to be achieved. If you see, my friends, Greek mythology is the rich repertory of such types of stories. Greek mythology is full of such type of stories. So it helps most of the tragic poets to find those stories to be converted into a tragic plot and tragic play. There are lots of stories available in mythology. How will you convert it? It is the skill of that tragic poet. Let us see for example one of the stories that is part of Greek mythology and how this story is converted into one of the best tragic plots and best tragic play. A story which is involving acts of violence between close kin. Now, Fred, this is the most fundamental objection of all, not of one person, of all. What is the fundamental objection in this story? That a child, which is related with a child to its father and mother. So you'll find out a story in Greek mythology that a child kills his father and sleeps with his mother. Now, this type of one line that a child kills his father and sleeps with his mother is a terrible thing to even think. It is the most terrible thing to think, even when you are trying to narrate a story without performing it on the stage, converting it into a tragic plot. It is almost a difficult thing to point out. Now, this would be the most potent material for tragedy if one could hope to find it out. This is having a very interesting material, and that's why uh, when we ask student to write down or in a creative writing any of the ideas to develop, only one line is given. And in today's world where I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, in the television industry, when the serials are being bombarded on us regularly daily, so they have to write down daily episodes. So in the morning, the director will give one line to the writers, the two team of writers sitting in that one hall, and the director will come in the morning and say, today I want an episode, tomorrow for shooting the episode, this is one line, now you develop. And those writers develop that one line into an episode of 25 minutes, and then those episodes have been submitted, and then those episodes are submitted to the producers, and producer, after reading that, which will create a sort of tradition, tragic impact, which will create an impact over audience, they choose that story, and that story has been appearing on the television. This is a routine way to show you the serial. So there are three, four writers. Not one writer is writing all the things. A line is to begin for daily episodes, daily shows. I'm saying about that. This is a routine thing that is in today's context. But if you talk about Aristotelian period, in Greek mythology, there is a lot of rich repertory of various kinds of stories that are part of their routine. And if you want to convert it, if you find a potential into it with this one line, you have to convert that one line into such kind of play that it should not look like a terrible thing for the society, that oh, this is a vulgar expression. This is what we feel after looking at into that particular thing. So if you think for a moment that this is a very interesting one line, that a child kills his father and sleeps with his mother, how will you develop this story? And Sophocles in his Oedipus did this successfully. He did both the things. Creates a terrific impact over the audience. Even this one line, which is taken from Greek mythology, we can say that Sophocles' Oedipus gives so many ideas to psychologists. Sigmund Freud created a theory based on it. All these people are having so many ideas gathered from simply one play called Oedipus, written by Sophocles. So let us assume for a moment that we have chosen it, and we have chosen Oedipus as subject of our tragedy. Now, where do we go from there? What we do or not do? Now, according to Aristotle, this is the question that we have to ask ourselves, that what was the first thing that happened to Oedipus, and what happened next, and so on. So if you want to construct things, you need to ask yourself that from which point I should begin with, and how this point from which I am beginning with should create a sort of, you can say, which can develop a sort of inquisitiveness amongst the audience, that the audience started to get involved into it right from its beginning, that okay, this is what it is happening. And that's why you will find out when Oedipus starts, it starts with that people are dying, and this makes people to make curious about why people are dying. Look at how Sophocles has crafted it. And Aristotle is trying to give a sort of idea that how a complex plot can be built and developed to create an important tragic effect in the minds of the audience. Suppose this line, and this is what Aristotle is discussing. I'm making it very simple, not in Aristotelian words. I'm making it simple for us to understand. These are the things Aristotle discussed, what I'm talking to. Suppose this line is taken by an historian. Now, a historian might work like this. How? As we have seen that historians in Aristotle's view are concerned with what happened, and so their narrative simply reproduce a given sequences one after another. Is it suitable? Is it suitable for us to uh, make a plot based on the perception of historian? What has happened one after another? Will it create that sort of impact? Will you feel will history develop a sort of tragic impact on the minds of audience? Aristotle is pointing out very categorically that when you want to build up a story, you need to have the perception of audience, that how the audience will think. That's why Aristotle's poet is not concerned with what happened with the first action and what happened, what are the consequences of it, and then what will happen, and then what will happen, and then what will happen. Poet need not to think in this particular manner. Poet has to think in a way that the kind of thing that would happen in accordance with necessity and probability. The things has the thing has to take place. The story has to move further with the idea of with the understanding of necessity and probability. That's why I said this phrase is continuously used in politics. So we should not just take over a ready-made series of events as a plot of our tragedy. Not a ready-made series. You cannot take a ready-made series of events. That Mughal history, that Babur came to India and Babur's son is Jahangir, and Jahangir's son is Akbar, and Akbar's son is again, oh sorry, Babur's son is Humayun, Humayun's son is uh, Akbar, Akbar's son is Jahangir, Jahangir's son is Shahjahan, Shahjahan's son is Aurangzeb. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This history. You need to construct a plot in such a way that it should carry necessity or probability in it. So we should not just take over the ready-made series of events for our tragic plot. Now, having selected Oedipus as our subject, we ought to forget about Oedipus and rethink the story in more abstract terms. Someone who kills his father and sleeps with his mother. How can we represent this as something that would happen necessarily or probably? How will you present it? What will be the mode of it? What are the events? What are the sequences? What are the actions that you will bring out? In other words, how can we imagine this as part of a series of connected events? Because this is another very interesting condition in plot, that there should be connected events. It should not look like it is broken images always. That's why Aristotle advised the poet to work down from the most abstract possible formulation To work out from the most abstract possible formation of the story of Oedipus. This is the most abstract format of story, that a child kills his father and sleeps with his mother. Abstract form of story. Through more to convert this abstract form of study through more and more concrete specification of it. There should be a concrete specification, justifiable specification, where the final version will reach with the justification that Oedipus's killing of his father and sleeping his mother are embodied as a connected series of events, are consequences of certain actions. You have to construct it in that format. You cannot say that, okay, simply I know this single line and I will develop it. As the sake of your, for your understanding, for the sake of you to, if some of you are interested in attempting how to write, I think you are the students, some of you are the students of creative writing also. So you can also take this one line and try to develop your own idea. How you will develop this idea? How will you develop the story if you want to develop it in today's context? That if I say, please try to rewrite Oedipus as a tragic play, instead of taking Oedipus, you can take any XYZ name and try to develop this single line. How will you develop it? This is a very interesting game. You can play it. If you feel you have a time and you can able to do it, you can write down. Now, when we are looking at Oedipus as a single line story taken from mythology, now developing in such a way that it is giving you a sort of tragic play which gives an impact, which has created an impact over the audiences. Let us see how might we proceed, since we know that we are writing tragedy because we want to evoke the emotions of pity and fear in amongst the audiences. We have an ultimate aim decided to it. That's why once you have decided your aim, please don't think that Aristotle is trying to make you a creative writer by making you giving you an examples and making you to think how to work it out. Aristotle is not at all trying to make you a creative writer. Aristotle is talking about the whole process, that how this tragedy may appear. Now, tragedies aim to evoke pity and fear, and we cannot allow Oedipus to do these things knowingly. We cannot allow Oedipus to do these things knowingly, that he is doing this after knowing all the things. No, you cannot do it knowingly. How it is possible that someone killed his father knowingly and sleeping with his mother would be monstrously wicked. It will be a wicked thing to even write down that knowingly he did all those things. Then it will not evoke pity and fear. It will make us to feel disgust. And you say, what disgusting and what vulnerable thing I'm looking at. So his downfall, Oedipus's downfall would create pity. It should not create a disgust amongst the audience. So Oedipus must act in ignorance. Ignorance of what kind? Oedipus must act in ignorance of the identity of his own father and mother. He doesn't know his father and mother. Then and then it is possible to have all those things take place. Now, please recall here the idea of ignorance that Aristotle discussed in chapter number 14. That ignorance is also one of the most essential part of the plot and character. And whatever Oedipus did, he did all those things in an error. That error is part of chapter number 13. We discussed it already. So, given Oedipus's lack of this knowledge that he doesn't know the identity of his father and mother, we can begin to see what is likely to be the climax of this kind of plot. How will be you reach to a climax of this particular if Oedipus acts are done in ignorance? Now he must eventually find out what he has done. He has to find out. Nobody will explore this thing and declare it that this is what Aristotle, this is what Oedipus did. No, Oedipus himself has to find out. And if he finds out, then the devastating impact of this discovery will give a sort of perfect tragic climax to the story. This discovery is to be done by Oedipus himself. That is how you can construct a one line. That is what we are discussing today. Here, the analysis of recognition that we did in chapter number 11 and in chapter number 16, that will be relevant here now to develop this climax recognition, the analysis of recognition. But the premise that Oedipus must be unaware of the identity of his father and mother also tells us something that how the early stages of the plot has to be developed. Now, if you are saying that Oedipus is unknown of the identity of his mother and father, then naturally a question comes in our mind that how it is possible that someone is not aware of his father and mother. Someone who is not aware of the identity of his father and mother, how it is possible? If they are father and mother of that particular child, the child has to recognize, has to know it. Then how can we say that he is unaware, unknowingly done all those things? Then for that you need to have certain actions taken place before this. Certain events has taken before this. We have to find it out. We have to identify it. We have to look at it. That something has taken place of the stage. Something has taken place before this plot. Something has taken place before this story that came into existence right now. Because you have to justify the unknowingness of Oedipus. If you don't justify the unknowingness of Oedipus, then the whole action that took place in the play will be the meaningless. And that's why his ignorance must surely imply that he has separated from his father in parents in infancy. When he was infant, he was separated from his parents. Now, what would be the reasons? You have to define the reasons. Now, this was actually a Greek practice. It was the Greek practice that the unwanted infant, if they come with an unwanted infant, that is an exposure of an unwanted infant, and that if you don't want that infant, you will throw that infant away somewhere in the forest. That was a Greek practice, and that's why there's no problem in principle that how parents will throw their children away into the jungle. By reading Oedipus, we come to know that Oedipus has been allowed, asked by his own father to kill him because he will kill his father. That was the prophecy. And that's why the king said, okay, take this child away from me, otherwise I'll die. And this was principally part of Greek society that they used to kill, they used to throw the unwanted infants. So we just have to supply some motive for Oedipus's parents to expose him and construct to a mechanism to ensure that despite being exposed, he survived to adulthood. You have to define certain mechanism. This is the principle that okay, Greek society is well known. Greek society is known for this practice. They used to follow this practice that they used to throw or kill the unwanted infants. Now, if this is a practice, then you have to justify it after doing that. Why this child was not killed? If the order is given by the king, why this child? Because if this is a practice of Greek society that throwing away or killing the child, unknown, unwanted infant. If this is the routine practice of Greek society, then why this child is not killed? Why this infant is not killed? You need to justify that also. Otherwise, you will not reach to that particular point. And so the events that are unfolding in front of us, they are unfolding in the form of exposing each and everything continuously. And we are reaching to the process that Aristotle describes, that the turning the stories into episodes, turning the whole story into episodes. So the episodes will construct a complex plot, and that complex plot will create a sort of tragic effect amongst the audience. Now, how this episode and how this episodic behavior, how Aristotle is talking about this episodic behavior, we will discuss it in tomorrow's lecture, so that it will not create a sort of confusion in the minds of all of us. I hope that you understand how these episodes are being created, how the story should carry recognition and revelation, how a complex plot is to be constructed by giving an example of an historian that a history should not follow the things to be done in the same fashion. Aristotle is trying to bring out the picture that how the story is being converted into episodes which can develop the inquisitiveness amongst the audience.